Hi there and welcome to Lorena's Labyrinth. If you're a newbie, of course, welcome to the channel. I hope you find content that you enjoy. We've got a number of playlists. Knock yourself out, go and check the channel out. If you're a returning visitor, of course, I want to say thank you for your ongoing support. That indicates to me that you're actually finding something that is of value to you, and that's the whole purpose of the channel. Before I get into today's content, which of course we're going to be talking about the crystal lepidolite, for the newbies and for the returning visitors, just a reminder, I timestamp everything in the description so you don't have to sit through the whole video if it goes long, because I do tend to go down a rabbit warren, and so you can just jump to whatever section that you're interested in. If you've got time and you want to hear my waffle, because I do tend to go on a waffle, you can do it at your leisure. You don't have to do it all in one hit. I invite you to leave your comments, your experiences, because if you're looking at some of the comments, obviously not everybody engages. I wish you would. I wish you would all come and say g'day to me, if nothing else. But I'm starting to get feedback, and thank God for that. So I really appreciate the feedback that I get from people about their experiences with using crystals, because it's different for all of us. And by that I mean, not only are our experiences different from perhaps a metaphysical perspective, not everybody is into that, but certainly if the geos come on board and they can help us out with their comments about how to identify the genuine from the fake, and even where the crystal can be sourced, that's always a major asset to us people that actually want to buy. And unfortunately, there's always people that are going to exploit other people. That just seems to be the nature of humanity. So we as buyers need to be a little bit astute. So I do talk about buying tips and strategies for you on all of the videos as well. But anyway, without further ado, let's get in and start talking about lepidolite, because it's right up there as one of my favourites. So when we talk about lepidolite, this image here is one that I guess most people, if you're familiar with lepidolite, you might actually think this is the only way lepidolite forms, but that's not actually correct. This is the one that tends to be able to be tumbled better, okay? So you can quite often find this as a tumbled stone, but there's another variety, and I will be showing you photos of it, where it's more like a layered mica type thing. And both of them, I've got both of these as part of my crystal collection, and I love both of them and I use them for different things. Anyway, just a little background about lepidolite. It has been used and prized for its unique properties throughout ancient times even, and apparently when I was doing my research, this was one of the things that I found, was that they actually used to grind it down into a powder, and they would use it as a pigment for making paints and dyes, because it's, well, obviously you can put that into the paint, and back in the day that's what they used to do. So they would use lepidolite for ceremonial purposes as well. Now, I talk about the mineral structure when we get to that slide, but one of the uses was actually they used it for healing back in ancient times. And it's very interesting that that link is there, because in modern times it's still used for healing purposes. What a bizarre thing. So we'll talk about that in a little while. Well, actually, I'll give you a clue. It's actually because it's full of lithium, and you'll be going, lithium? We'll talk about that in a little while. So from a metaphysical perspective, if we're doing an overview here, it's also known as the peace stone, for those people that are into metaphysical work, or the grandmother stone, because it's known for its ability to bring tranquility and balance to the person, especially when they're going through some really difficult times. To summarize it, it's while it's called that, it's considered to be a stone of spiritual growth, development, to activate the brow and the crown chakras. It offers protection, and it's said to support good health of the endocrine, respiratory, the neural systems, and also to support immune health, which that's obviously very important to a lot of people, especially in these days and times. As always, if you've watched any of the other videos, you will know, and I'll just repeat it in case you haven't watched any of the other ones on crystals. When we talk about a crystal being linked or associated with a particular star sign, it doesn't mean that people that have a different star sign can't use it. If you feel drawn to using the crystal, then you can use it. It's going to work for anybody. In the instance, though, of lepidolite, it's actually recommended for people that are Virgos, Libras, or Capricorns. Now, I don't know the rationale that's behind that. I'll be quite honest, because I'm neither an astrologist or, I guess astrologist. That's not really my field of expertise. Mine's pretty layman, if you like. I have an understanding of the star signs as in when I interact with people, but when it comes to prescribing, shall we say, crystals for people of a certain star sign, that's definitely not my expertise. But I can see how it would be valuable to a Virgo or a Libra, because they are actually what we call air signs. So they're in their head, so they do a lot of thinking. And lepidolite, that's one of the attributes that actually helps to calm an overactive mind, should we say, and also to work with insecurities, because when people overthink, they have tendencies to be, well, with respect, they can make mountains out of molehills. Okay, so this is probably why it's recommended for the for the air signs. I don't know why it would be recommended for Capricorn, except that perhaps they get too locked in, and I'm being very stereotypical here. My apologies if I offend, but Capricorns tend to be quite focused on the earthly activities, such as building a career. I need to have a cough, sorry about this. Building a career or building financial stability. And I, just for the record, I quite often will associate people that are Capricorns with the King or Page of Pentacles in the tarot decks, which is that their self-esteem is quite largely built upon their material possessions. If they don't have a lot of them, they actually feel like they're not living their potential, I guess is the best way of describing it. So anyway, back to Lepidolite and the Zodiac. Yes, it's recommended for these 3 star signs above the other ones. But if you feel drawn to it, use it, because I am not one of these star signs, and I've found it to be very beneficial for me in my life. So there's nothing like talking about a crystal and getting all excited about it and passionate and actually telling a whole story and then work out that it didn't actually record. That's rather frustrating. So now I've got to revisit what I actually already spoke about for about 10 minutes. Never mind. Okay, so when we talk about the mineral makeup of lepidolite, first of all, I want to put out that disclaimer there. This is where I really invite those people that are the prospectors that find crystals or rocks for us to buy, and also the geologists that are trained and got that expertise, that they actually contribute. I welcome your contributions, because I am not a geologist, I'm not a gemologist, and these are the experts in the field. Basically, I am a collector of crystals, and I used to retail them, so I'm blessed in many ways. I've been able to look at them, hold them, and get a feel for them, if you like, with confidence that what I'm looking at is actually quality. Because the reality is, if you're going to buy, and certainly if you're going to become a seller of crystals, that you actually need to know where this crystal came from. It needs to be the genuine article. And so the best form of protection and preservation against buying the fakes is knowing the source and getting a certificate of authenticity, a reputable seller. But anyway, we'll talk about buying tips in a little while. Right now, what we're looking at with this image is the one that I call the layered type. So these are not the professional names, and I've got both the tumbled and the layered type because I use them differently, and I will talk about that in a little while. But for now, when it comes to the layered type, when you're looking at it, it looks a little bit like fish scales that are pushed down, just sheets of it. I think somebody said to me that it's mica. It looks like mica layers. I don't know about that. I don't know that I would call it that, because I don't know that it actually has mica. What I do know, and this is because I did my research, as much as I've got certain information, when I deliver the content on the channel, I like to actually make sure that I've double checked my facts before I say something as any form of authority or whatever. So this business is the research page. Can be a bit boring, a bit deep for some people. Bit deep for me, actually, let's be real. Okay, so it's part of the aluminium silicate family. It's considered to be a complex lithium, and it's a primary source of lithium. Now, if you know anything about lithium, one, you will know that batteries are being made from it these days. So it does have an industrial purpose as well as the metaphysical. Things like the power vehicles and cars and that kind of stuff, they have lithium batteries in them. Now, if they continued to be popular, given that lepidolite, you only have to think about this for a moment and go, well, whoa, really? If electric cars continue to be really popular, then we're going to need more and more of the lithium to power them. Now, if lepidolite is a primary source of it, that's going to have a finite, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not going to be available forever is where I'm going with this. It's going to run out at some point in time, I would imagine. But for now, it's very available. And when I bought my pieces, it wasn't expensive. It was quite cheap. Now, the other thing, the reason why I'm pointing out the business of lithium, this is the bit that I find fascinating, is that that lepidolite was used as a healing crystal back in ancient times. And lithium today, currently, is still considered scientifically proven. It is part of a prescriptive medication for people with extreme bipolar disorder with the mood swings. Now, obviously, that's in small doses, because if you had the big doses, it can be toxic. So my understanding is too that when it comes to lithium as a prescription, that it is done in small doses and it's a last resort. So other things here, just as getting back to the mineral stuff, you can see that it's a very soft crystal. It's only 2.5 to 4 on the, do we pronounce it Moz? I don't know. Moz, whatever. It's considered to have a vitreous to pearly luster or texture. I would say, because I've got the tumbled and this layered type crystal, I would say that the layered one is more pearly and more reflective. The tumbled stone that I've got, it doesn't seem to do that pearly reflections on it, but I must admit that my tumbled stone is not the best quality. It's pretty average as far as grading goes. Now, when it comes to sources, I hope I'm not repeating myself here, because I've actually already recorded the slide. It's very readily available throughout the world. Australia is a primary source, and this might be why I was able to pick it up so cheap here in Australia as well. But you can certainly access it. Now, given that sources, won't last forever, if you like the sound of the attributes from a metaphysical perspective of lepidolite, then you might want to consider getting some sooner rather than later, because the rarer a crystal becomes, the more expensive it becomes. So if you decide that you're going to buy some lepidolite, that you're going, yes, give me some please, right, well, of course, this is where it helps to have a bit of an idea of what we're looking at and making sure that we're buying the real stuff. So I think what we've got here on the left-hand side is probably some pretty high-grade lepidolite. I sourced this photograph off the Mindat website, which is a geology website. So I don't believe that I'll be finding fakes and frauds on there. I think it's a pretty trustworthy site. The buyer thought that they were actually being ripped off because the lepidolite, so this is actually a discussion forum where somebody has taken a photograph of their crystals and going, are these real? Are these the real McCoy? I would have been like that if I got lepidolite that looked like that, because I've never seen it that nice. That's the bottom line. So it's very high grade, and you can see the different colours associated with it. I'm talking actually about the image, I should have said, on the left-hand side. Anyway, the consensus, because everybody will say, look, you can't really tell when you're looking at a photograph, but based on their collective knowledge, the geologist said, look, they believe that that is real lepidolite. The lepidolite that I have that's tumbled is probably the shade of purple in between. I'm looking at the hand, just so you know, the image with the hand holding the crystals. It is probably in between the light purple and the medium purple, and it does have the white spots that we see in the darker purple. They're more obvious in my little tumbled stone. What else can I say? Oh, okay, yes, here it is in my notes, that when it comes to the metallic looking ones on the right hand side, that yes, it is mica and it forms sheets. And so, this is right. They were answering the person saying, look, yes, it does have a mica. Yes, it does form as sheets like we've got in the image on the right-hand side. But sometimes the mica is so small and compacted so tightly within the crystal itself you don't see the sheets as we do in this image on the left. And no, they weren't dyed. That was the interesting thing. The little bit that was really interesting with this was one of the geos provided a suggestion that if you want to establish if a crystal has been dyed, then you wouldn't do this if you've got a tumbled, but if you've got a crystal in the rough, as we have here, that you would break a little bit off and you would place it in acetone to see if the colour actually bleeds. And the buyer of this particular crystal said that they did do that, and so they now were comfortable that this particular dark coloured lepidolite is actually very, very brightly coloured lepidolite that is not dyed. And they also outlined that they had sourced it where they bought it from. The seller had said it had come from Madagascar. Okay, so that's why it's helpful to know where the crystals come from, because to put this into perspective, if we're buying amethyst, everybody goes, oh, that's a deep coloured purple amethyst, that must come from Uruguay, or it's got to come from South America because they've got these brilliant colours. They're not the only countries that have this really deep coloured purple. We have some in Australia as well, but they are the best known, and they seem to have the greatest stocks and sources of it. So knowing the source comes in handy there. Excuse me as I swallow. In case you're not aware, you can actually get acetone nail polish that you could use for the testing, but don't quote me on it. If you want to give it a try it at your own risk, because I haven't ever done it. I've never felt the need to. What can I say about the layered stuff? Just that, yeah, look, mine's probably about that colour, a lilac-y colour, my layered one. It's got some depth in the layers as well, but it's not a really dark one. So just another tip when it comes to buying as well. Here on this slide, I've put different types, how you can source it once again, because this is good to attune your eye to look at what you're buying. And it's going to help you, especially if you're doing online buying, to get a bit of an idea of what it is, if they might be trying to sell you something false or whatever. Now, my understanding is... the image on the right, first of all, I'll bring this to your attention. I've never seen lepidolite that is white, but apparently that is the genuine article as well. There's no guarantees. There's always risk when it comes to buying online, and when the supplier isn't a verified supplier of a particular crystal. So where I'm going with this anyway is once you're looking online, because I would prefer to buy face-to-face. In fact, if there's a big buyer's tip I can give to people is stop buying online and find your local supplier. Go back to supporting your local business, because then at least you're going to know that what you're buying is what you're buying, because their business will go bust if they're selling fraudulent stuff. But anyway, if you do choose to buy online, these types of lepidolite are genuine as well. The orb in the middle, I'm going to draw that one to your attention, because that's kind of like what my tumbled stone looks like, except it's a much paler purple. Now, the tips for buying online are know the dimensions, okay? If they put a coin next to it, that's not good enough. I'm sorry, online retailers, do not be putting your coin next to any crystal of any size and expect us to actually know what size it is, because unless we live in your country and we have the same currency, it might be a small coin, it might be a big one. You're far better off to get the dimensions by putting it next to a ruler and taking a photograph with that. And if they haven't done that, you as the buyer, you can actually contact them and say, give us the dimensions, please. If you're looking at a sphere, you want to know how tall it is, you want to know what the circumference is, because it's a sphere. So, and then you want to know the weight of it. Okay, these are the important factors. How big is it? How much does it weigh? Where's it sourced? Is it verified? And then once you know all of that, look at the price of it. Is it a fair price? Do a price comparison. Look around. If it's cheap as chips, it's probably a fraud. That's the first thing off, unless you're buying from the area where it's mined. If it's a local supplier, the chances are it's priced as good as what it is, because it's not going through 5 people's hands before it goes online to be sold to you. So you want to know where they are, where it's sourced, and then you need to ask yourself, how much is the freight, and what is the currency conversion, because those are some of the mistakes that I've made more recently when I buy online. And I'm going to keep repeating this because it's such a classic, and I've got to have a sense of humour about this. I bought a very rare tumbled stone more recently. It was reasonably priced. It was close to the source and location. Excuse me. Sorry, that's my dog. So I'll just quickly move on with this. Basically, I bought this, we'll call it an exclusive rare tumble from the source. I got it at a good price. It cost me about $40 Australian. So I'm thinking, as I look at that, $40 for a tumble, I mean, really, that is quite expensive for any tumbled stone, but it is very rare and you don't often see them. So I made the decision, absolutely, yep, I'm prepared to pay 40 Australian dollars for this tumbled stone. What I forgot to do was look at the price of the freight, and the freight that was tacked on actually brought my item up to, I think it was 95 Australian dollars I have paid for a tumbled stone. Now, if I'd known I was going to be paying 95 before I clicked the checkout button, I should have been paying attention. I probably wouldn't have purchased it. I think it's overpriced for what I got. And just for the record, people, and this message is probably for the retailers as opposed to us buyers, when that tumblestone arrived, it had become scratched on the way over to Australia because it came from overseas. And the retailer kindly gave me a gift, a little glass pyramid or something like that. I can't remember what it's called, maybe a tetrahedron, is that what it's called? But either way, it was glass, and the crystal that I ordered was quite soft. So there was this great big scratch down it when it arrived, and I thought, oh dear, that just compounded it. And, as far as me being disillusioned with how much I spent on it. But anyway, those are the tips I can share with you for buying. Sorry, my apologies. I've had to stop and start recording today. But either way, getting back into it, hopefully there's not a lot of difference between the voice level, when I speak into the microphone for you, because I'm aware that can be distracting. But anyway, getting back into it, when we talk about the spiritual metaphysical benefits, obviously I said that Lepidolite is associated with spiritual development, spiritual growth, and the connection to the higher self and guidance as we walk our life path. But what this actually means is that Lepidolite acts as an activator of this higher consciousness, this more expansive awareness and understanding. So to give a little bit more detail, I'm going to break it down a little bit and spend a bit of time on this slide, because actually Lepidolite is a very spiritual crystal. So when we talk about being able to access the higher consciousness, this means being able to connect with our spirit guides, to work with higher energies as part of transforming the energy around us. And that means clearing away anything that is less than love. It also becomes a case of, when we talk about promoting self-discovery, we're talking about expanding our awareness and getting some real insight into ourselves, the ability to recognize patterns of limiting behaviors and thoughts that impact undesirably, shall we say, on our personal experiences, walking the planet, as we say. And in the process, we're able to learn to master our thoughts and our behaviors and our energy. So this is where the idea of self-mastery comes in. Sorry about the doggy on his squeaky toy. Being able to access these realms, of course, we have to raise our own personal vibration. And the way we do it is through a meditative, it's like going into a meditative state and then practicing sacred breathing. I've got videos up, by the way, on how you can actually practice the breathing, because that is a skill as well. It's a little difficult to start with. It's kind of like box breathing, except that the inhales and the exhales last longer. Going on to transformation, though, it's more than a transformation. It's like a rebirth. It's like a whole new beginning. All the past, that is not necessary is basically replaced with new. Now, an example of that might be, let's say that you've had, for example, terrible mood swings, difficulty managing your emotions, and become quite reactive and angry, right? Well, if you send transformational energy into that and say, release what I no longer need, there becomes a recognition that those behaviors are part of a pattern that commenced somewhere in your life. You don't need to dig right down into the pain and go back towards it, but you can transform the energy and just going forward in my life, I choose to respond as opposed to react. This is where you bring the affirmations into it. Lepidolite is also a crystal that's recommended for people when they're transitioning, whether it's into this new stage of the current existing life or if they're actually at the end of life stages in a hospice or something like that, where they're about to, for want of better words, die. We would call it human death, but where they're about to transcend their bodies and go into the next phase of their spiritual life. And in these instances, while I've got a slide dedicated to uses, I would just say, I'm quite happy to say it here, what you would do for that person who is in that stage of life at the hospice or whatever, is you would actually place a little piece of lepidolite under their pillow, or if you've got the mica clusters or whatever, you can actually put that on the bedside table for them. Just keep it close to them because it does have environmental influences as well. Now, lepidolite is also said to act as a protective mechanism, shielding the aura. So once you've purified your aura, you want to keep that clear. So the idea is that you could wear lepidolite as a talisman to protect your aura, not just from negative energy, but what's the word for it? Electromagnetic pollution or whatever. You could have lepidolite, for example, next to your computer. If you're on the computer a lot, you could put it there to purify the what are they called, negative ions or something like that. And it's also recommended that women who are pregnant actually wear or carry lepidolite with them as protection for their unborn child. So I would interpret that as being a healthy pregnancy. Now, in regard to negativity within the aura, lepidolite is said to work in a way where even if you weren't conscious of, say, a negative thought or a negative belief that keeps you locked, it has the capacity, apparently, I say allegedly and that kind of stuff because, of course, there's no evidence to support any of this. But the idea is that lepidolite finds that block. It's sort of like zones in on it like a radar, finds it, and then directs the light into it, which brings it to your conscious understanding for release. Sometimes we don't realise we've got a negative pattern there. We need to have it brought to the conscious. Now, of course, when we talk about accessing the higher realms, for a lot of people, it might be actually accessing their psychic gifts. But intuition, while that is considered to be a psychic gift, you don't need to be a clairvoyant. You don't need to be able to speak to spirits to have very high levels of intuition. Some people, it's just gut instinct. And in fact, intuition in that way would probably be called claircognizance. But anyway, moving on to the physical properties. So just a reminder, these are some pretty large claims actually that a crystal has these physical, metaphysical attributes. And so once again, as always, these are not all my experience. This is a collection of my research, seeing other people's experiences, talking to other people, and also using it myself. So I will explain how I use it on the crystal uses page. But anyway, it's said to be able to relieve aches and pains, including muscle spasms and cramps, period pain and migraines. And it's believed to be a really powerful pain remover for people post-surgery. So this is why it's recommended for people post-surgery. Not only is it said to assist with, what's that word? Reducing pain. Okay, I'll go with that. Anybody would think, honestly, that English wasn't my first language, but it is. But I think I'm a little ungrounded at the moment. I'm doing too much spiritual work. But anyway, it's said to not only reduce the pain post-surgery or post-operation, but also to promote recovery because it's got this capacity to support wound healing and is an anti-inflammatory. Now, what else have I got? Oh, also one of the other things that I found is that obviously sometimes in different age groups and demographics actually respond to anesthetic in different ways, if we're going to have surgery. And this is particularly for older people. There's scientific evidence that does suggest that there is a greater risk of developing early onset dementia. I have no idea why, but I know that this is a risk for older people that have surgery. So for those people, yeah, absolutely, if they're an older person, take a little piece of lepidolite, well, perhaps into your room or with your stuff. If you've got to stay in hospital afterwards, keep the lepidolite with you. It's also said to reduce shoulder and muscle tension and tightness. So another benefit of lepidolite is to help reduce infection, so that's why it would be beneficial for post-surgery as well. If there's been any incisions made, there's always a risk of a bacterial infection. So you would be able to use your lepidolite there. Look, in those instances, I would actually consider washing. You've got to always, if you're rubbing a wound or anything like that, you've got to clean. You wouldn't use the same dirty tissue again and again, is where I'm going. That you would cleanse your crystal, and by that I mean run it under water or whatever if it's a tumbled stone, and you could rub your scar tissue very gently, okay, because you don't need to push the crystal into your stomach, but you could rub that, and then you could get it washed afterwards and just test it out, see if that promotes the wound healing, is where I'm going. So the other big claims with lepidolite is that it supports, oh, by the way, if you were going to touch your wound, you wouldn't want to do that with a flaky one. You would want to do that with the tumbled. Okay, just clarifying there. So lepidolite in itself is said to support the function and health of the endocrine, immune, and nervous systems. And I guess that's why it's so good for the brain and repatterning, getting rid of these limiting thoughts and that. It's said to correct any hormone imbalances. If a person suffers from seizures such as epilepsy, it's supposed to reduce those seizures, I guess, and also supposed to be beneficial as a protection against Alzheimer's and senility. Other properties are said to, we're going into, no, this is both actually. I've got anxiety here, that it reduces the symptoms, because while anxiety is emotional, we know that there becomes brain function involved in that. There becomes neural pathways there. Same with addiction, same with sleep and sleep disorders. So you're talking about repatterning the brain there. And because we're talking about hormones as well, there's a lot of hormones in the brain that affect our quality to sleep, melatonin being one of them. This is why a lot of people are taking melatonin tablets at the moment. So this is the neural function that we talk about. So it's the ones like sleep and anxiety and addiction and that, yes, okay, they're associated with emotional as well, but they still have a physical aspect to them. Other aspects, okay, so other properties are with the supporting of the respiratory system. So if a person's got a breathing problem or disorder such as asthma or emphysema, it's said to alleviate any water retention in the lungs. So maybe that means, this is not my experience, I've got to say, maybe that means that the person can express the fluid off their lungs easier. Now, I know asthma affects people in different ways, but I have seen asthmatics that basically cough and cough and cough. That's, I don't know if it's got a different name, but they cough and cough and cough until they actually throw up water that's on their lungs. So perhaps it helps with that. It's also got the properties of detoxification, and if people have got physical symptoms of an allergy, basically the stings, the hives, the bites and that kind of stuff, because it's an anti-inflammatory, it's said to protect against these reactions as well. Recommended for women at all stages of their life, whether it is premenstrual, during menstruation, post-menopause, or actually not so much post-menopause, but menopausal symptoms, said to help with things such as hot flushes. And for people that have got cancer or being treated for cancer, it's something that is recommended while they're going through chemotherapy and radiation, just to promote recovery there. So I'll speed this up a little bit. Basically, from an emotional perspective, it is about balancing, it is about stabilising. And of course, that has not changed since ancient times. If they were using it for healing back in those days, it remains a mood stabiliser today in the modern world. So it is considered to be recommended for people with chronic mental disorders, such as manic depression. I think that is now a redundant term. I think it's now called bipolar, or if people have got the SI, hopefully you can work that out, the S, ideation, when things go bad. Actually, I'll just give when they are faced with challenges where they start saying things, even if they're not considering acting upon it, when they start saying that, oh, I might as well just go and whatever, it becomes a very big emotional reaction with repetition that can become a real risk. So people who have got that as part of their pattern, they would purportedly benefit from the use of lepidolite and wearing it. What else have we got here? Just, obviously as a mood balancer and stabilizer, and combining that with the neural repatterning, it becomes a case of knowing your strengths, knowing your limitations, choosing when to react, how to react. That's that self-mastery. And when we're able to respond appropriate to challenges and think before we act, then we open and pave the way to this greater optimism and joy. Just because we do spiritual stuff, that's you, me, whoever, doesn't mean that we don't experience the emotions of anger and irritability or even snapping, because we all have this internal response to the triggers and challenges that we face. The point is learning and mastering that reaction to be able to do something creative through it. So the idea is that lepidolite helps to navigate through the challenges. I'm going to try and speed this up because I actually have a lot of notes here about what you could do with lepidolite and how to use it, because it is such a diverse, multi-purpose crystal, shall we say. Okay, so for those people that get nightmares and night terrors, pop a bit under your pillow. If you're dealing with stress and fatigue, perhaps even chronic fatigue, or feeling psychologically depleted, where you've got PTSD or vicarious trauma because you work in the mental health fields and you're exposed to people's trauma on a regular basis, you might want to consider working with lepidolite, whether that is through meditation or just wearing it as a pendant or whatever, just to protect your own energy balance as well. It's said to be beneficial. I don't know that I would do this though, just so you know. It's recommended that people place a piece in the baby's bedroom and near the cot or whatever. If you've got babies like what I had, they'll just stick their hands out, grab it and throw it in their mouth. So I don't know that I would recommend that, but it's supposed to be helpful to soothe and nurture them. If you are going to do it, you want to really put it out of the baby's reach. And babies can be so, I can't think of the word, they can just, well, put it this way, my babies could actually climb the cot. The moment they could cock their leg over the side, that was it. They would do a long drop, shall we say. So just because it's a baby or a toddler doesn't mean that it's not going to be able to access things at height. They can be quite creative. Now, speaking of children, another way that you can actually use your lepidolite is to reclaim your inner child, and that is about healing these really deep down issues. It might be abandonment issues, it might be rejection issues or whatever, but they're formed in our early childhood, and we heal them as adults and move on from them. So when we're activating the higher consciousness, what we are doing is actually really opening up certain chakras, and that for lepidolite is actually the heart. It's firstly associated with the heart because it's seeing through the eyes of love. Love is centered in the heart. And when we understand what it is that we're seeing and feeling, then the crown chakra, what we think, that's the expansion of awareness. So it is, just to summarize, it's associated with the crown, the brow, and the heart chakras. And to recap is, I feel, I love, I care, I'm empathetic, I understand, okay? And I see clearly, I see and I know the truth, and I understand and I have compassion towards the person or towards myself. Okay, that's a very simple explanation of how the chakras work here. Now, there are recommendations for use, of course. If you're wanting to open up your psychic gifts and your intuitive aspects, you could meditate with the crystal, or you could wear it, as jewelry. You use it as a pendulum, all of that kind of stuff. Put it in the environment to raise the vibration and to help you bring greater light into the actual space that you're living in. Some people use it for rituals as part of clearing their energy fields, or for protecting, if I can speak. I've put the I've put the pendulum up because some people will use it for divination, and this is when they do the yes no questions, okay, but in the simplest form. This is what you would use it for, where you ask a question of your guides, is it in the best interest of X for me to do such and such, yes or no, right? You don't ask ambiguous questions and expect a clear answer, is where I'm going. You would also be recommended to keep it in your environment if you're working to support your business pursuits, to get some direction in that, and to enhance your communication. I'm just thinking, where is my lepidolite right now? I should have it on my desk, bearing that in mind. Okay, so as I said, for pain management post-surgery, you could use it. You could even wear it as jewelry. If you're not flat out in bed having nursing care, and you're simply, let's say you've had a hip replacement done or something like that, so you've got a certain level of mobility, but you want to promote the recovery, you could wear it as a pendant. I mean, it's at your discretion. Now, I did also mention that I have probably a more unique way of using lepidolite. It's something that I and my mentor many years ago, we talked about. I was going through a bit of stuff at the time, highly stressed, lots of challenges, and I always found soaking in the bath was actually a really good way to unwind. But because I was so highly stressed at the time, I was talking to my mentor when I was actually at his crystal shop, and he said, "You know what you need?" And I said, "What do I need?" And he went and grabbed me some flaky lepidolite. He didn't actually have any lepidolite tumbles at the time. And he said, next time you have a bath, he said, my guidance is pop this in the bath with the rose quartz. Have you got rose quartz? Because, I mean, he was never one to try and sell me stuff just to flog product. He would always say, have you got any at home? Yes. Okay, well, that's good. So, yeah, get your lepidolite, get your rose quartz, and get some clear quartz, right? Clear quartz, of course, acts as an amplifier of the energy. And he said, next time you have a soak in the tub, just pop that in. We both said we don't know how this is going to work on the crystals. It might be damaging to the crystals itself. It may have an impact on them. So just be aware of this if you decide to do it yourself. But anyway, yeah, I did. And I used to soak in the tub. I would put my lavender oil in and that kind of stuff. And I actually found it to be very, very healing, very relaxing. Now, more recently, though, I have been, the occasional headache. All right. So what I have found is that if I actually put on the tumbled stone, because I've got a tumbled stone and I can wear it in the net pendant holder things, I can't remember what they're called, I find that actually that works to clear headaches. I wouldn't go as far as saying I've got a migraine, but I had a couple of them that were pretty doozy, and I ended up putting on the lepidolite and I found it to be quite effective. Now, I must say, it is absolutely not suitable, just a reminder, not suitable for a elixir if you do crystal elixirs. There are different ways of doing elixirs, so I recognise that and I respect that, but you would not be making an elixir with lepidolite by placing it directly into the water. One of the things that I've seen is that you can make elixirs by, let's say, filling up a bowl with the water that you want to use, your purified water or whatever, and then putting your lepidolite into a glass and then inside the water bowl, but you don't immerse that glass. You've got to keep the lepidolite out of the water that you're going to be ingesting. All right. So just a reminder about that. Now, if you've watched my other videos, you know that I have a crystal lucky dip and people get to put their hand in there and pull one out, and that conveys an extra message to them, or at least it's some insight for me as to what that person is going through. So if someone stuck their hand in and pulled out a lepidolite tumbled stone, I'd be saying, right, now is the time to actually create the space for some self-care, some nurturing to calm your mind, because I would imagine they're going through a lot of stress, potentially chaos in their personal life, even if they're not talking about it, and that they're scattered. So this is a case of saying, look, take the time, self-care, everything's going to be okay. It's just a matter of opening your mind, focusing on actually not you're opening your mind, retaining an open mind and being open to solutions. And when you can get those emotions in check, then you'll be able to see the pathway far more clearly. And yeah, just that it's coming, And look, as with everything, it's all contextual. Sometimes it might be a case of your guides are wanting to speak with you and they want you to create the space so that they can actually give you some guidance directly, one-to-one. That might be something that could be considered as well. So when it comes to crystal care, this is why I say, if you're going to do the bath thing, do it with caution, because lepidolite is sensitive to heat, to chemicals, and to hard materials, because it can scratch. Now, from my perspective, the baths that I have, they are not stinking, steaming hot. You know what I mean? I can't cope with that kind of hot. I prefer not a lukewarm bath. I like it to be a bit warm, but maybe it's because I don't keep it in the water for so long. The other thing is too, you've got to care for it. You've got to cleanse it regularly. Okay, if we're talking energetically, you need to clear it after the bath, rinse it off, pop it on your selenite, or do whatever it is that you do with your crystals. Now, in my experience, I've got to say, because I was using, it was actually a really big lump of rose quartz that I was putting in the bath, and it was rather a large clear quartz point that I was using in the bath too. Now, I just want to say, I didn't notice any damage happen to my crystals, any of them, through this process. But I guess it's not something I was doing all day, every day anyway. And that's why I say, look, do it at your own risk. Okay, if it needs to be cleaned, so let's get back to crystal care. If it needs to be cleaned, yes, you can wash it in lukewarm water. Yes, you can use a soft brush and mild soap to clean it. You would dry it afterwards. I've got to say that I've found lepidolite to be very water tolerant. Just my experience, okay? Once again, I would say store it away from direct sunlight. I don't keep it in direct sunlight so that the colour doesn't fade. It's just something that I don't want to risk, because of this Australian heat that we have and the bright sunlight. It does... the notes that I found says that long periods of water exposure can break down lepidolite, just so that you know. But I would imagine that's probably more the mica type looking one, the flaky one that I've got. But I can say it certainly did cope with the bath. All right. It does need to be stored away from other gems, especially if it's raw, because raw lepidolite, I say raw, actually it's lepidolite in the rough is the proper term. It can crumble easily. So you've got to be careful that the edges don't break on it. As far as charging it for metaphysical purposes, yeah, you can use other crystals like quartz or selenite. Amethyst is one that is recommended. It's not one that I use, but it's recommended by other people. What else? Moonlight. I've got a whole video on cleansing and care of your crystals, and most of them are going to be fine for lepidolite, okay? I would imagine even salt water you could do, but I don't do salt water, so each to their own. So, my friends, it has been a very long video. That is about all I can share with you today. I do hope that you have a wonderful and blessed day, and I shall catch you on the next video. Take care. Bye-bye for now. Oh, before I go, though, don't forget, say good day, and feel free to give your feedback on how you use lepidolite, because that's always going to be interesting.